Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today I want to talk about the challenges of separating the art from the artist. So let me just start by explaining what I mean by that phrase, separating the art from the artist. So what I mean is, if there's a filmmaker or a writer or whatever whose work you enjoy, and then you discover that either they've done some terrible things in their life or they hold views that you really disagree with, can you still enjoy their art? And it's something that that gets talked about on BookTube a lot, and that I think increasingly in the modern world people think about. It doesn't necessarily need to be a blocker to your enjoyment of books and movies. Clearly there are tons of books and movies that you can still enjoy, even if you do try and avoid works by certain writers or directors or whatever. But I think it is something that gets discussed a fair bit. And I had a couple of comments on a video I put up recently, so my tier ranking video where I ranked really long books. I made some comments about a particular writer in that video, which I thought were fairly mild, but I did have a couple of comments. So one person suggesting that they find it weird that people can't separate the art from the artist, and another person who took particular offence to my comments about that writer, albeit I thought that they were fairly mild, to be honest with you. So what I want to talk about in that video is my personal thoughts on this, my personal approach to it. Everyone's going to have a different way of managing this. Some people may not be bothered with it at all. For some people, it may be more of a big deal. But I thought I would talk about my particular views on it. What I'm not going to do is mention any particular writers or authors by name, because I think as soon as you do that, people who love those authors, may disengage from the conversation a bit and focus on that part of the video rather than the general discussion. So let me talk about it. So for me personally, it generally isn't a problem. I have certainly, have read and continue to read books by authors, not necessarily who've done terrible things, although there are probably some of those, but definitely authors whose views I disagree with, authors who have been, explicitly racist or homophobic or, whatever, either in their work or in, personal proclamations about things. I don't find it too much of a problem, but I would say that with two big caveats. So the first one is, I think time makes a huge difference. So it's certainly not right that somebody at the at the start of the 20th century would hold racist views, but it was a lot more common. So I think it's easier to. I personally find it easier to forgive, and it doesn't, in terms of it not getting in the way of my enjoyment of a book. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, which is kind of related to that, is the person what I would call like an active campaigner about the particular topic that I disagree with them on. And if someone is, if an author is really in their face about their support for a particular thing, and it's something I disagree with, then I'm more likely to get turned off from reading their books. And the reason for that is not necessarily a political stance necessarily. It's more that it's a distraction when I'm reading the book. So if I'm reading a book by someone who is, often in the press, making statements about something, and I really disagree with those statements, when I'm reading the book, that's kind of in my mind, and that can be a distraction from my enjoyment of the book. And if you've watched the channel for any length of time, you will know I'm all about just enjoying reading books, and I don't want that kind of distraction. So those two things kind of work together in that if someone held those views a very long time ago, they're probably dead, and they're probably not going to be what I would call an active campaigner. And I guess the kind of flip side of the active campaigner is someone who it has been reported on has particular views, but generally keeps quiet about them. I'm more able to accept reading books by that person because it's less easy to get distracted by them. But it's also just a question of balance. So how much enjoyment do I think I'm going to get out of the book versus how distracted do I think I'm going to be by the views or actions of the person. So let me give you an example. This is like a stupid example, but I think it's an example that illustrates the point. So if Jeffrey Dahmer had written a cozy rom-com, even if it was like the best cozy rom-com ever written and everybody said it was fantastic, I would find it very difficult to read it without being distracted by my knowledge of Jeffrey Dahmer's, being a serial killer and cannibal. It would definitely distract me. And clearly that's a very extreme example, but I think it kind of makes the point, hopefully. And then the other thing that's important is whether or not the author's views, really leach onto the page. Because, if they're rubbing your face in their views and you really disagree with their views, a bit like, if they are an active campaigner, that's going to be much more distracting and make the book more difficult to read. And then the other thing to consider, and which I wanted to talk about very quickly, is the fact that even if you don't know an author is racist or homophobic or misogynist or whatever, they may be, and that may end up on the page. And as we go into Garb August, where I'm encouraging people to read trashy books, and particularly quite often older trashy books, like vintage trashy books, I think the likelihood of encountering that kind of thing is more common. Now, as I've said, I don't particularly have a problem with it, but other people might. And when I look at this stack of books that I've kind of picked out for Garb August, I'm fairly sure that I'm going to come across some views in here that I don't necessarily agree with, but that won't necessarily erode my enjoyment of the book. And for me, again, it's all about balance. It's about how annoyed am I or turned off am I by bad representation, by sexism, racism, whatever. How annoyed am I by that versus how much fun am I getting out of the book? And as long as I'm continuing to get enjoyment out of the book, then things I don't agree with in the book aren't going to stop me reading it. But it's all a question of balance, and it will be different for everybody. So I wanted to say that, particularly as we go into Garb August, because I know that there will be some people out there who struggle with this stuff more than me. So I hope you found that interesting and hopefully a bit useful as well, especially as we go into Garb August. Do let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're really good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.